The candles flickered as Duke Rowan Ashcroft stood before the council, his jaw tight, fists clenched. Around the table sat cold-eyed nobles, their silence louder than accusations. His advisor leaned in, voice smooth as poison. "Your Grace, the bloodline is dying. Your wife has failed you. Perhaps it's time to consider other arrangements." Elena's name hung in the air like a death sentence. Outside, thunder cracked. Inside, Rowan felt the walls closing in. 300 years of legacy crushing him, his marriage crumbling, and a choice no man should have to make. Stick with us until the end to see how this impossible situation unfolds. If you're hooked already, hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. The storm had been building for 3 days. Not just the one outside, though that was bad enough, wind howling across the northern moors like something alive and hungry. Rain hammering the stone walls of Ashcroft Hall until the whole place seemed to shudder. No, the real storm was the one nobody talked about. The one that hung over every meal, every glance, every conversation that died the moment Elena walked into a room. Rowan stood at the window of his study, hands braced against the frame, watching lightning split the sky. The glass was cold against his palms. Behind him the fire crackled, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled into his bones. "Your Grace." He didn't turn. He knew that voice, smooth, measured, always perfectly respectful in a way that somehow felt like mockery. "What is it, Harlow?" His advisor moved into the room with the quiet precision of a man who knew exactly how much space he occupied and how to use it. Marcus Harlow was tall, lean, with graying hair swept back from a face that looked carved from marble. He dressed impeccably, spoke impeccably, and had served the Ashcroft family for 15 years. Rowan's father had trusted him completely. Sometimes Rowan wondered if that had been a mistake. "The council is growing impatient," Harlow said, settling into the chair by the fire without being invited. "Lord Garrett sent another letter this morning. He's not the only one. Let them wait." "They've been waiting for 5 years, Your Grace." Rowan's jaw tightened. 5 years. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of hope slowly curdling into something darker. 5 years of watching Elena shrink into herself while the estate whispered and judged and waited for him to do what everyone expected. "The Ashcroft line has stood for 3 centuries, Harlow continued, his voice soft, reasonable. "Your father built this estate into what it is. Your grandfather expanded the holdings. The name means something here. It means stability, strength, continuity. But a name without an heir is just a memory. I'm aware of the situation. Are you?" Harlow leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers steepled. "Because from where I sit, Your Grace, it looks like you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. Your wife is a good woman, kind, loyal, but kindness doesn't secure a legacy. The people need to see strength. They need to know the line will continue. And if it can't continue through her, don't." Rowan's voice came out low, dangerous. "Don't finish that sentence." Harlow raised his hands in a placating gesture, but his eyes remained sharp. "I'm only saying what the others are thinking, what they're saying behind closed doors. You're a young man still, barely 35. You could remarry, start fresh. There are noble families in the South who would get out. Your Grace, I said get out." Harlow stood smoothly, brushing non-existent dust from his sleeves. At the door he paused. "You can't protect her from reality forever, Rowan. Eventually, you'll have to choose the woman you married or the legacy you inherited. One way or another, something has to break." The door closed with a soft click. Rowan stood alone in the firelight, listening to the storm rage outside and feeling its twin tear through his chest. Dinner was a special kind of torture. Elena sat at the opposite end of the long table, picking at her food with the mechanical precision of someone who'd forgotten what appetite felt like. She wore a deep blue gown that brought out the color of her eyes, or it would have if those eyes hadn't been so carefully fixed on her plate, avoiding his gaze, avoiding everything. She'd been beautiful when he married her. She still was. Dark hair that caught the candlelight, delicate features that hadn't hardened despite 5 years of living under this roof, hands that moved with unconscious grace even when she thought no one was watching. But the light had gone out of her. Slowly, degree by degree, until the woman sitting across from him felt like a ghost of the person he'd fallen in love with. "How was your day?" he asked, because someone had to break the silence. "Fine." Her voice was quiet, automatic. "Yours?" "Long." She nodded, picked at her food. The distance between them felt like miles. 3 servants moved through the room, silent as shadows, refilling wine, adjusting dishes, pretending not to notice the suffocating awkwardness. Rowan wondered what they said about them in the kitchens. Probably the same things everyone else said, that the Duke had chosen poorly, that his wife was broken, that the bloodline would end because he'd been too young and too foolish to marry strategically. "I'm thinking of expanding the southern orchards," he said, grasping for something, anything. "The yield last season was good. If we invest now..." "That sounds wise." "Elena." She looked up, finally, and for a second their eyes met. He saw exhaustion there, resignation, something that might have been grief. "What do you want me to say, Rowan?" "I want you to talk to me. I want you to tell me what you're thinking, what you're feeling, anything that isn't this..." He gestured helplessly between them. "This nothing. What's there to talk about?" Her voice cracked, just slightly. "We both know what's happening. The whole estate knows. I walk through the halls and people stop talking. I go into town and they stare. Your counsel looks at me like I'm a problem to be solved." She set down her fork with trembling fingers. "Maybe they're right." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true." She laughed, and the sound was hollow. "I'm failing at the one thing I was supposed to do. The one thing that matters." "You matter." "Do I?" She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much disappointment. "Or does the idea of me matter? The Duchess, the wife, the vessel for your precious legacy." The words hit like a slap. Rowan felt anger flash through him, not at her, but at the whole damn situation, at the weight of expectation that had been crushing them both since the day they married. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Elena stood, her chair scraping against stone. "I've given you 5 years, Rowan. 5 years of trying, of praying, of watching, month after month as nothing happens. 5 years of being weighed and measured and found wanting. And now..." Her voice broke. "Now I'm just waiting for you to tell me it's over, that you've chosen your name over me." "Elena." But she was already walking away, her footsteps echoing in the vast dining hall, leaving him alone with the servants and the silence and the terrible truth neither of them wanted to face. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, alone, as had become their habit over the past year, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind rattle the windows. Somewhere down the hall, Elena was probably doing the same thing. 2 people trapped in the same nightmare, unable to reach each other. When had it gotten so bad? He could trace it if he tried. The first year had been hopeful. They'd been young, in love, convinced that time was on their side. The second year brought the first whispers, the first concerned questions from his father's old friends. By the third year, the questions became pressure. By the fourth, the pressure became demands. And now, in the 5th year, it felt like they were drowning. Rowan threw off the covers and paced to the window. The storm had passed, leaving the night clear and cold. Stars scattered across the sky like broken glass, beautiful and untouchable. He thought about what Harlow had said, about choice, about legacy. The Ashcroft name meant something here. That much was true. His great-grandfather had carved this estate out of wilderness, had turned a harsh frontier into something stable. His grandfather had expanded it, built schools and roads, created opportunities for families who'd had nothing. His father had modernized the industries, brought prosperity to a region that had known mostly hardship. And now it fell to him to continue that work, to preserve what they'd built, to ensure the name survived. But at what cost? He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. In the distance, he could see the lights of the town, small and scattered. Hundreds of families who depended on the estate for their livelihoods, thousands of acres that needed managing, contracts, agreements, alliances, all woven around the assumption that there would always be an Ashcroft at the center, holding it together. Without an heir, what happened to all of it? The question kept him awake until dawn. Eat. The next morning brought worse news. Rowan was in the stables checking on a mare that had gone lame when Harlow found him. The advisor's expression was carefully neutral, which meant trouble. Lord Garrett is here, with half the council. Rowan straightened, brushing straw from his hands. I didn't call a meeting. They called their own. Harlow's tone was dry. They're in the great hall, waiting. Of course they were. Rowan found them seated around the long oak table that had served the Ashcroft family for generations. 6 men, all older than him, all wealthy landholders with their own interests to protect. Lord Garrett sat at the head, a bull of a man with a red face and hands like hams. Next to him was Lord Pemberton, rail-thin and sharp-eyed. The others he knew by sight, if not by name, men who'd served on his father's council and now treated him like a boy playing at leadership. Your Grace, Garrett's voice boomed through the hall. Good of you to join us. I wasn't aware I'd been invited to my own estate. Desperate times. Garrett smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We need to talk about the situation. What situation would that be? Don't play stupid, boy. The situation with your wife. The lack of an heir. The fact that this entire region is starting to wonder if the Ashcroft line is coming to an end. Rowan felt his temper spike, but forced it down. My marriage is not your concern. It is when it affects all of us. Pemberton leaned forward, fingers drumming on the table. The Ashcroft name is the bedrock of stability here. Without continuity, without clear succession, everything becomes uncertain. Trade agreements, land contracts, political alliances. It all depends on there being an Ashcroft in charge, not just now, but 20 years from now, 50 years from now. I'm aware. Are you? Garrett cut him off. Because it doesn't look like it. You've had 5 years, 5 years of a barren marriage. At some point, you have to face facts. The word barren hung in the air like a curse. Rowan's hands clenched into fists under the table. Choose your next words very carefully, Garrett. Or what? You'll throw us out? We're not your enemies, boy. We're trying to help you. Your father would have... My father is dead. The room went silent. Rowan stood slowly, planting his hands on the table. My father is dead, and I am Duke now. Which means what happens in my house with my wife is my decision, not yours. Then make a decision. Pemberton's voice was cold. Because right now you're making none at all. You're clinging to sentiment while the estate crumbles around you. We've been patient, we've waited. But patience has limits. What are you suggesting? The men exchanged glances. Finally, Garrett spoke. Annul the marriage, quietly. We'll handle the church, make it clean. Then you remarry. Someone younger, someone proven fertile. Pemberton's daughter is 18, healthy as a horse. Or there's Lord Ashton's niece in the south. Or, no. Your Grace, I said no. Rowan's voice was ice. I made vows. I'm not breaking them because you're impatient. Then you're a fool. Garrett stood, his chair scraping back. Your father built this estate on hard choices. Your grandfather before him. They understood that sometimes you have to sacrifice personal feelings for the greater good. If you can't understand that, maybe you're not fit to lead. The threat was barely veiled. Rowan met his eyes. Get out of my house. We're trying to save you. Get out! The command echoed through the hall. For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly the council members rose. They filed out in silence, but the looks they gave him were cold, calculating. The look of men who'd made up their minds. Only Harlow remained, standing by the door with that infuriating, neutral expression. That went well, he said mildly. Rowan sank into his chair, suddenly exhausted. What do they want from me? They want certainty. They want to know the estate will survive. And right now, Your Grace, you're not giving them that. Harlow moved closer. I know this is difficult, but they're not entirely wrong. You have responsibilities that go beyond one person, beyond one marriage. So I should just, what? Cast Elena aside? Pretend the last 5 years meant nothing? I'm saying you need to consider all your options before the choice is taken from you. Rowan looked up sharply. What does that mean? But Harlow was already walking away, his footsteps soft on the stone floor, leaving Rowan alone with a dread that settled into his stomach like lead. He found Elena in the garden. It was her refuge, the one place on the estate that felt like hers. She'd spent years coaxing life from the harsh northern soil, roses that somehow survived the frost, herbs that grew despite the wind, a small patch of wildflowers that bloomed defiantly every spring. She was kneeling in the dirt, her hands muddy, her dark hair tied back with a simple ribbon. For a moment, watching her, Rowan remembered why he'd fallen in love with her. Not because she was noble or beautiful or politically useful, but because she was real. Because when everyone else at court had been performing, playing roles, she'd just been herself. Honest, kind, unafraid to get her hands dirty. She looked up as he approached, and something in his face made her go still. What happened? The council was here. Ah. She turned back to her flowers, but her hands had stopped moving. What did they want? They want me to annul our marriage. The words came out flat, brutal. Elena flinched like he'd struck her. I see. I told them no. For now. Elena, it's fine. She stood, brushing dirt from her dress with hands that shook. You don't have to protect me anymore, Rowan. I know how this ends. I've always known. You don't? Yes, I do. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were dry but hollow. I've been living on borrowed time for years. Every month that passes, every disappointed face, every whisper I pretend not to hear, it's all just delaying the inevitable. They're right. I'm failing you. I'm failing everyone. Stop. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't. Please don't make this harder than it is. Make what harder? She laughed, and the sound cracked. Letting me go. The words hit him like a physical blow. For a long moment, Rowan just stood there, feeling the ground shift under his feet. Around them, the garden bloomed in defiance of everything harsh and cold, but it felt like standing in a graveyard. I'm not letting you go, he said finally, his voice rough. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they want. You're my wife. I'm your failure. She said it quietly, without drama, just stating a fact. And sooner or later, you're going to have to choose. Your legacy or me. The Ashcroft name or the woman who can't give you children. That's not. It is. We both know it is. She looked away toward the distant line of trees. Maybe it would be better if you just made the choice now, before this destroys us both. Elena, I'm tired, Rowan. Her voice broke. I'm so tired of being measured and found wanting, of watching you torn apart between duty and… She stopped. Whatever this is. Love. The word came out hoarse. It's love, Elena. It's always been love. She closed her eyes. A single tear traced down her cheek. Sometimes love isn't enough. Then she walked past him, leaving him standing alone in the garden, surrounded by flowers that shouldn't survive but did, in a world that demanded more than any of them had to give. That night, the manor felt like a tomb. Rowan sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the portrait above the fireplace. His father, stern and proud, looking down with eyes that seemed to judge. Next to him, his grandfather. And next to him, generations of Ashcroft men stretching back into history. All of them had produced heirs. All of them had secured the line. All of them had done what was expected. And now it fell to him to be the one who failed, unless he made a different choice. The whiskey burned going down. Outside, the wind had picked up again, bringing with it the scent of coming rain. Another storm. Another night of lying awake, feeling the walls close in. Somewhere in this house, Elena was doing the same thing. Two people who loved each other, being slowly crushed by the weight of history and expectation. Harlow's words echoed in his head. Eventually, you'll have to choose. But what kind of choice was that? What kind of man would he be if he cast aside his wife to satisfy a council of old men? What kind of legacy was worth that price? And yet he could see the logic, could understand the pressure. The Ashcroft name did mean something. The estate did support hundreds of families. The stability did matter. So where did that leave him? Rowan poured another drink, then another. but no amount of alcohol could drown the question that burned through everything else. If he had to choose between his name and his wife, what kind of man did that make him? And what kind of man did he want to be? The fire crackled, the wind howled, the portrait stared down, silent and judging. And Rowan Ashcroft, Duke of a dying bloodline, sat alone in the dark, knowing that whatever choice he made, someone would pay the price. He just didn't know yet if it would be Elena or himself or the legacy that 300 years of Ashcrofts had died to build. The storm was coming, and there was nowhere left to hide. The silence between them grew teeth. 3 weeks passed after the council's visit, and every day felt like walking on ice that was slowly cracking beneath their feet. Rowan threw himself into work, inspecting the northern timber operations, reviewing contracts until his eyes burned, writing the estate boundaries until his horse was lathered and exhausted. Anything to avoid the emptiness that had settled into Ashcroft Hall like fog. Elena retreated further into herself. She took her meals in her room, spent hours in the garden, even when the weather turned bitter. At night, Rowan could hear her moving through the corridors like a ghost, unable to sleep, unable to rest, just existing in the spaces between what they'd been and what they were becoming. He told himself he was giving her space, that she needed time. The truth was uglier. He didn't know what to say to her anymore. Every conversation felt like navigating a minefield. Every silence screamed with things neither of them could voice. And through it all, Harlow watched. Always there, always perfectly courteous, always ready with advice that felt less like guidance and more like manipulation. "The eastern fields need attention," Harlow said one morning, catching Rowan before breakfast. "The tenant farmers are complaining about, handle it. Your Grace, they specifically asked for you. They want to see their duke taking interest in, then tell them their duke is occupied with more pressing matters." Rowan didn't look up from the ledger he'd been staring at for the past hour without actually reading. "You're perfectly capable of dealing with tenant complaints?" "Of course." Harlow's voice was smooth, though I wonder if perhaps getting away from the manor might do you good. Clear your head. You've seemed distracted lately. I'm fine. Are you? Because forgive me, Your Grace, but you look like hell. When's the last time you slept? When's the last time you had a real conversation with your wife? Rowan's jaw tightened. That's none of your concern. Everything about this estate is my concern, including you. Harlow moved closer, lowering his voice. I know you're trying to protect her, but isolating yourself like this, isolating her, it's not helping anyone. The staff is worried, the council is watching, and your wife, he paused. Your wife is fading, Rowan. Surely you can see that. What do you want me to do? The words came out harsher than intended. Everything I say makes it worse. Every attempt I make to reach her just pushes her further away. Then perhaps it's time to consider that some things can't be fixed, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go. Rowan finally looked up. Harlow's expression was sympathetic, concerned, perfectly calibrated. But there was something in his eyes, a glint of satisfaction, quickly hidden. You really think I should annul the marriage? I think you should do what's best for everyone involved, including Elena. Do you honestly believe she's happy like this? Living in shame, watching you tear yourself apart trying to protect a situation that's already broken? Harlow shook his head. Sometimes love means making the hard choice, even when it destroys you. The words settled like stones in Rowan's chest. I'll think about it, he heard himself say. Harlow smiled. That's all I ask, Your Grace. Just think about it. That afternoon, a stranger arrived at Ashcroft Hall. Rowan was in the stables when he heard the commotion. Servants rushing around, someone calling for hot water and fresh linens. He walked out to find a carriage in the courtyard, travel-worn and mud-splattered, and a man being helped down by 2 footmen. He was younger than Rowan, maybe 30, with sandy hair and an easy smile despite obvious exhaustion. His clothes were quality but practical, and he moved with the loose-limbed grace of someone used to travel. Apologies for the dramatic entrance, the stranger said, wincing as he straightened. Horse threw a shoe about 5 miles back. Had to walk the rest of the way. Not my finest moment. You're a long way from anywhere, Rowan said, studying him. What brings you to Ashcroft territory? Adrian Vale. He extended a hand. I'm a surveyor for the Crown's Northern Expansion Project. We're mapping the mountain passes for possible trade routes. I was told there was an inn in the village, but the innkeeper said the roads washed out from the storms. Suggested I might find hospitality here until it's repaired. His smile turned sheepish. I promise I'm not as much trouble as I look. There was something immediately likable about him, an openness that felt rare in Rowan's world of calculating nobles and political maneuvering. Still, caution won out. How long are we talking? 3 days? Maybe 4? Soon as the road's passable, I'll be out of your hair. Rowan glanced at the house. They had the space. And turning away a crown surveyor would raise questions he didn't need. Fine. But you keep to the guest wing and stay out of the way. Understood. And truly, thank you. You're saving my life here. Adrian's smile widened. Or at least my back. That carriage seat was murder. As the servants led him inside, Harlow appeared at Rowan's elbow. A surveyor, he murmured. Interesting timing. It's just coincidence. Perhaps. But Harlow's eyes followed Adrian with an intensity that made Rowan uneasy. Still, we should keep an eye on him. You never know what the Crown's really after. Elena met Adrian Vale by accident. She'd been in the library, her other refuge, though lately even books couldn't hold her attention, when the door opened. She looked up, expecting a servant, and found herself facing a stranger with warm brown eyes and an apologetic expression. Sorry, I was told this was the... He stopped, taking in her face. I'm interrupting. I'll go. No, it's... She trailed off, realizing she'd been about to say fine again, that automatic response that meant nothing. The library is open to guests. I'm Elena, the Duke's wife. Adrian Vale. He bowed slightly, an old-fashioned gesture that somehow didn't feel awkward. The unexpected guest cluttering up your household. I really am sorry about this. Storms aren't your fault. She marked her place in the book she hadn't been reading and studied him properly. He looked road-weary but alert, curious without being invasive. You're a surveyor? When I'm not getting thrown by temperamental horses, yes. He moved to the window, looking out at the mountains. This is incredible country. Harsh but beautiful. I've been mapping the Northern Territories for 2 years now, and I still find myself just stopping sometimes, just to look. Despite herself, Elena felt a flicker of interest. Most people complain about the cold. Most people don't appreciate what makes a place special. The cold is part of it. The wind, the isolation, the way the light hits the peaks at dawn. You can't separate those things from the landscape. They're what make it worth seeing. He glanced back at her. Though I imagine living here year-round is different from passing through. It's... She paused, surprised to find herself actually considering the question instead of giving another hollow response. It's unforgiving, but there's a kind of honesty to that. The land doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Adrian smiled. Exactly. No false promises, just rock and wind and the truth. Something in his words resonated. For the first time in months, Elena felt something other than numbness, a spark of recognition, of being understood. How long are you staying? Just a few days, soon as the road's clear. He moved toward the door, then paused. Though, if I'm being honest, I wouldn't mind the delay. It's nice to be somewhere that feels real, not performing, not pretending. His eyes met hers with an openness that made her chest tighten. Present company included. Then he was gone, leaving Elena standing in the library with her forgotten book and the strange, disorienting feeling that something had shifted. Harlow found Adrian that evening, drinking whiskey in the guest parlor. Mr. Vale settling in comfortably? Very much so. Your staff has been incredibly kind. Adrian gestured to the seat across from him. Join me? Or is that not appropriate protocol? Protocol can be flexible among gentlemen. Harlow settled into the chair with his usual precision. So, a surveyor, that must be fascinating work. It has its moments. Lots of walking, lots of cold camps, lots of questionable food. But yes, when you find a view that takes your breath away, it makes up for the hardship. And the Duke's wife? Harlow's tone was casual. Did she take your breath away? Adrian's expression cooled slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. Nothing untoward, merely an observation. Elena Ashcroft is a beautiful woman, accomplished, well-bred. It's a tragedy, really, her situation. What situation would that be? Harlow sipped his drink, letting the silence stretch. You haven't heard? I suppose you've been in the mountains. The Duchess is unable to provide an heir. 5 years of marriage and nothing to show for it. The council is pushing for an annulment. The Duke is resisting, but... He shrugged delicately. Sentiment only carries so far. Adrian's jaw tightened. That's a private matter. Is it? When it affects the entire region? When hundreds of families depend on stable leadership? Harlow leaned forward. The Ashcroft name has held this territory together for 3 centuries. Without an heir, everything falls apart. The Duke knows this. His wife knows this. They're both just too stubborn or too sentimental to accept reality. So you're what? Pushing them toward divorce? I'm serving the estate's interests, as I've done for 15 years. Harlow's eyes were cold now. The Duke is young. He'll recover. He'll remarry, produce heirs, secure the legacy. And the Duchess will be free to find a life where she's not constantly reminded of her failure. Everyone benefits. Except the 2 people actually in the marriage. Ah, a romantic. Harlow smiled without warmth. How refreshing. But romance doesn't keep estates running, Mr. Vale. Romance doesn't feed families or maintain order. Sometimes the practical choice is the only choice. Adrian stood. I think I'll retire. Long day. Of course. Harlow remained seated, watching him go. Sleep well, Mr. Vale, and do be careful while you're here. Ashcroft Hall can be complicated. Easy to stumble into situations you don't understand. Adrian paused at the door. Is that a warning or a threat? Merely friendly advice. Between gentlemen. The next 2 days proved dangerous in ways no one could have predicted. Adrian, despite promising to stay out of the way, kept appearing in the library, in the gardens, in the corridors. Always polite, always respectful, but present in a way that felt both accidental and inevitable. And Elena, starved for genuine connection, found herself gravitating toward him. They talked about books, about travel, about the mountains and the estate and the strange beauty of harsh places. Nothing improper. They were never alone without servants nearby, never crossed any line. But the connection was undeniable. For Elena, it felt like remembering how to breathe. Have you always lived in the north? Adrian asked one afternoon. They were walking the garden paths, Elena showing him the flowers she'd coaxed from the difficult soil. No, I grew up in the south. My father was a minor lord, respectable but not wealthy. When the Duke's family came looking for a match, she trailed off. It seemed like a fairy tale. This strong, handsome man who looked at me like I mattered, who saw me instead of just seeing political advantage. What changed? Reality. The word came out bitter. The fairy tale ran into the actual requirements of being a duchess, producing heirs, securing the line, fulfilling expectations I couldn't meet. That's not your fault, isn't it? She knelt by a rosebush, fingers gentle on the thorns. Everyone else seems to think so. The council, the staff. Sometimes I think even Rowan, though he'd never say it. And what do you think? The question caught her off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked what she thought? What she wanted? Not what she should do or what was expected or what would be best for everyone else, but what she actually wanted. I think... She stopped, started again. I think I've forgotten how to be anything except a disappointment. I used to have interests, passions. I used to paint. Did you know that? Hours in the studio, covered in oils, completely absorbed. I haven't picked up a brush in 3 years. Why not? Because what's the point? A duchess who can't have children shouldn't waste time on frivolous things. She should be trying harder, praying harder, sacrificing more. Elena laughed, hollow, as if enough self-flagellation would magically fix everything. That's not living. That's just existing. Yes. The word came out as a whisper. That's exactly what it is. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother couldn't have children after my sister was born. Complications from the birth. For years, she felt like a failure. My father's family certainly treated her that way, but eventually she decided to hell with them. Started a school for girls in our village, taught reading, arithmetic, practical skills. It wasn't what anyone expected, but it mattered. She mattered. Elena looked up at him. Did your father support her? Eventually, once he realized that clinging to what should have been was killing what actually was. Adrian met her eyes. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop apologizing for who you are and start building something that actually matters, even if it's not what everyone expects. The words settled into Elena's chest like seeds. Dangerous seeds. Seeds that whispered she might be more than her failure, that there might be a life beyond this slow suffocation. You make it sound possible, she said quietly. It is possible, just not easy. He smiled, and it was sad and understanding and completely genuine. But then, anything worth having rarely is. Rowan saw them from his study window, just walking, just talking, nothing improper in their posture or proximity, but something in the way Elena moved, animated, alive, present in a way she hadn't been in months, made his chest constrict with something dark and poisonous. They'd been spending a lot of time together. He hadn't heard Harlow approach. The advisor stood at his shoulder, also watching the garden scene. She's being polite to a guest, Rowan said, his voice flat. Of course. Though one wonders if hospitality needs to be quite so extensive. Harlow's tone was carefully neutral. I'm sure it's innocent. Elena is a good woman, loyal. She would never actually betray you. Then why bring it up? Because appearances matter, Your Grace. You know that. The staff is already talking. If word reaches the council that your wife is spending her days with a charming stranger while you hide in your study, he let the implication hang. Nothing is happening. Probably not. But perception is reality in our world. And right now the perception is of a marriage so broken that the Duchess seeks connection elsewhere while her husband withdraws. Harlow moved to pour himself a drink. I'm not saying she's done anything wrong, but isolation makes people vulnerable. And this Adrian Vale, charming, sympathetic, completely outside the situation, he's exactly the kind of person a lonely woman might turn to. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. What are you suggesting? That you need to act, not out of jealousy, that would be beneath you, but out of recognition that the current situation is untenable. Your wife is drifting, you're drowning, and the estate is watching everything fall apart. Harlow's eyes were sharp. You can't save this marriage, Rowan. But you can save your legacy. Before it's too late. She wouldn't. She's lonely, desperate, convinced she's already lost you. People do surprising things when they have nothing left to lose. Harlow set down his glass. I'm not saying Elena would intentionally betray you, but intention doesn't matter if the outcome is the same. The council already questions her loyalty. If they have any reason to believe she's formed an attachment to another man, even an innocent one, they'll use it as ammunition to force your hand. The words wormed into Rowan's mind, finding purchase in his fear and exhaustion. He watched Elena laugh at something Adrian said, her face transformed with a joy he hadn't seen in years, and felt something inside him crack. How long until the road's clear? Another day, maybe two if the weather turns. Then he leaves the moment it's passable. Wise decision. Harlow's voice held quiet satisfaction. I'll see to it personally. That night, Rowan made a mistake. He'd been drinking, not enough to be drunk, but enough that his edges were blurred, his judgment compromised. When he heard footsteps in the corridor, he followed them without thinking. Elena was heading to the library. He caught up with her outside the door. We need to talk. She turned, surprise flickering across her face. Now? Yes, now. He pushed into the library and she followed, closing the door behind them. For a moment they just stood there, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. I've seen you, he said finally. With Vale. Her eyes cooled. We've been having conversations. Is that forbidden now? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying, Rowan? There was an edge to her voice now, something sharp beneath the exhaustion. That I'm not allowed to speak to guests? That I should stay locked in my room like a shameful secret? Don't put words in my mouth. Then use your own words. Tell me what you're actually thinking instead of just... She gestured helplessly, hovering, watching, judging. I'm not judging you. Aren't you? Isn't everyone? Her voice cracked. I've been judged every day for 5 years. By the council, by the staff, by you, whether you admit it or not. At least Adrian talks to me like I'm a person, not a problem to solve or a failure to manage. Adrian, Rowan's jaw tightened. So it's Adrian now. That's his name. And what else is he, Elena? What else is happening that I should know about? The accusation hung in the air between them. Elena went very still. When she spoke, her voice was ice. How dare you? No, you don't get to do this. She stepped forward, and there were tears in her eyes now, but also fury. You don't get to disappear for weeks. You don't get to avoid me, ignore me, treat me like I'm already gone, and then question my loyalty when someone actually treats me like a human being. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? She was shaking now, 5 years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already made your choice. You're just too much of a coward to say it out loud. Elena, I have done nothing wrong. Nothing. I've had conversations with a guest who leaves in 2 days and will never return. That's all. But apparently even that, even basic human connection, is too much to ask. She wiped at her eyes angrily. You want to know what's actually happening? I'm drowning, Rowan. I've been drowning for months while you watch from the shore, too afraid of what the council might think to actually reach for me. And now you have the nerve to accuse me of what? Looking for comfort elsewhere? Maybe I should. At least then I'd have something real instead of this slow death. The words hit like physical blows. Rowan felt his own anger surge to match hers. I've been trying to protect you. From what? From life? From feeling anything at all? She laughed bitterly. You've been protecting yourself, Rowan, protecting your precious legacy, protecting your options in case the council wins and you have to cast me aside anyway. Don't pretend this is about me. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Nothing about any of this has been fair. She was shouting now, years of silence finally exploding. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be barren. I didn't ask to be the reason your bloodline dies, but here we are. And the least you could do, the very least, is not accuse me of betrayal when all I did was have a conversation with someone who actually sees me as more than a failed womb. The silence that followed was deafening. Rowan stared at his wife, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months, and saw the truth. The exhaustion, the pain, the slow erosion of everything she'd been when they married. And he saw what he'd become. Not her protector, her jailer. Elena, He didn't know how to finish, didn't know how to apologize for something so fundamental it went beyond words. She shook her head, backing toward the door. I'm tired, Rowan. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of hoping. I'm tired of this. She looked at him with eyes that held something worse than anger, resignation. Maybe everyone's right. Maybe we should just end this. At least then we'd stop destroying each other. Don't say that. Why not? It's what you're thinking, what Harlow's been whispering in your ear, what the whole damn estate is waiting for. She reached for the door handle. Do what you have to do. Make the choice everyone's demanding. Just stop pretending there's any other ending to this. Elena, wait. But she was gone, the door closing with a quiet finality that felt like a death sentence. Rowan stood alone in the library, surrounded by books full of wisdom he couldn't access and knowledge he couldn't use, and felt the last foundations of his marriage crack beneath the weight of everything they'd left unsaid for too long. Outside, winter was coming. Inside, it had already arrived. Harlow found Adrian packing the next morning. Road's clear, the advisor said from the doorway. You'll be able to leave within the hour. Good. Adrian didn't look up from folding his clothes. Ready to get moving? I imagine you are. Things have gotten complicated. Harlow moved into the room. I wanted to thank you, actually, for your help. Adrian paused. I haven't helped with anything. Haven't you? Harlow's smile was cold. You showed up at exactly the right time, provided exactly the right kind of companionship to a lonely duchess, created exactly the kind of situation that makes the Duke question everything. He tilted his head, almost like it was planned. You're insane. Am I? Or am I someone who understands that sometimes you need a catalyst? Sometimes things need a push to move in the right direction. Harlow stepped closer. The marriage is broken now. Truly broken. Not because of distance or pressure or even inability to produce heirs, but because of betrayal. Real or perceived, it doesn't matter. Rowan will never trust her fully again. And Elena, he smiled. Elena now knows there's a world beyond this prison, that she could be something other than a failed duchess. I'm not part of your scheme. You don't have to be. You just have to exist, to represent possibility, to be the proof that their marriage is already dead. Harlow moved to the window, looking out at the estate. Within a month, maybe two, the Duke will agree to an annulment. The council will install a new duchess from a younger, fertile family. And he paused. I will have saved this estate from extinction, all thanks to a chance encounter with a traveling surveyor. Adrian grabbed his bag. You're a monster. I'm a pragmatist. There's a difference. Harlow turned back to him. Now, you'll leave quietly. You'll never contact the Duchess again. And you'll forget you were ever here. Unless you want the crown to hear some very interesting stories about surveyors who seduce noblewomen while pretending to map trade routes. I didn't seduce anyone. Doesn't matter. The story is what matters. The perception. Harlow's eyes were flat and cold. So we understand each other? Adrian stared at him for a long moment. Then, jaw tight, he nodded once. Good. Safe travels, Mr. Vale. Thank you for your service. Dead. Elena learned Adrian was leaving from a servant. She found him in the courtyard, loading his bag into a cart. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression made her steps slow. You're leaving early. Road's clear, no reason to impose further. His tone was polite but distant, not the easy warmth she'd grown used to. I appreciate your hospitality, Your Grace. The formality felt like a slap. Adrian, I should go. Long journey ahead. He swung up into the cart, not meeting her eyes. Thank you again, for everything. And then he was gone, the cart rattling down the drive, leaving Elena standing in the courtyard with the growing certainty that something had shifted, something had broken, and she didn't even understand how or why. Just that the one person who'd made her feel human again had vanished like smoke. She stood there until the cart disappeared from sight, the wind cutting through her dress, and felt the last warmth bleed from her chest. Somewhere above, she knew Harlow was watching. And somewhere in the manor, Rowan was convincing himself that he'd done the right thing, protecting his marriage by driving away the one person who'd reminded his wife what it felt like to be alive. The trap was closing. Neither of them could see it yet, but the jaws were already snapping shut. 2 weeks crawled by like wounded animals. Elena stopped leaving her room, except for brief walks in the garden at dawn when no one else was awake. Rowan buried himself in paperwork that didn't need doing, rode the boundaries until his steward begged him to stop, drank alone in his study while the portraits of dead Ashcrofts watched with silent judgment. The staff whispered. The council waited. And Harlow moved through it all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of collapse, always present, always helpful, always pushing just hard enough to keep everything sliding toward the edge. The timber contracts need your signature, he'd say, appearing at Rowan's elbow with documents already prepared. The eastern tenants are 3 months behind on rent. We'll need to enforce collection or set a precedent we can't afford. Lord Garrett sent another letter. The council wants to meet. Always something. Always pressure. Always the gentle reminder that the estate needed leadership, needed certainty, needed an heir, needed what Rowan couldn't provide while chained to a marriage that was bleeding out in slow motion. I'll handle it tomorrow, Rowan would say, and Harlow would nod with that patient, understanding expression that somehow made everything worse. Of course, Your Grace. Though tomorrow the situation will be even more complicated. Eventually, we run out of tomorrows. The words haunted him, especially late at night when he lay awake knowing Elena was doing the same thing 3 doors down, both of them prisoners in the same house, unable to reach each other across a distance measured in feet, but feeling like miles. He'd tried talking to her once, knocking on her door after midnight when the whiskey had given him false courage. She'd opened it, eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, and they'd stared at each other for a long moment before she'd quietly said, "I can't do this tonight, Rowan. I just can't." And he'd walked away because he didn't know what else to do. That had been 5 days ago. They hadn't spoken since. The council forced the issue on a Tuesday. Rowan was reviewing grain shipment reports when Harlow appeared with 7 men behind him. Not a request for a meeting, an ambush. Lord Garrett led the charge, his bulk filling the study doorway. "We're done waiting." Rowan stood slowly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. We've been patient. We've given you time. But this situation has gone beyond acceptable." Garrett moved to the desk, planting his hands on the wood like he owned it. "The estate is suffering. Trade agreements are stalling because nobody trusts there'll be an Ashcroft here in 20 years. The tenant farmers are nervous. The merchants are looking at other regions. You're so busy protecting your feelings that you're destroying everything your father built." "My marriage is not. Your marriage is dead." Lord Pemberton stepped forward, his thin face carved with impatience. "Everyone can see it except you. Your wife hides like a ghost. You drink yourself stupid every night. The staff reports you haven't shared a bed in over a year. This isn't a marriage, it's a slow suicide." Rowan's hands clenched. "Get out of my house." "It's not your house." Garrett's voice dropped. Dangerous. "It's the Ashcroft estate. And the estate belongs to the bloodline, not to one man's stubborn refusal to face reality. Your father understood that. Your grandfather understood that, but you?" He shook his head. "You're letting sentiment destroy 300 years of legacy." "What do you want from me?" "We want you to act like a duke instead of a lovesick boy." Pemberton pulled out a document, laying it on the desk. "Annulment papers, already drawn up. Sign them, marry Pemberton's daughter by summer, and we'll have an heir within the year. The estate stabilizes. The bloodline continues. Everyone moves forward." Rowan stared at the papers like they were a snake. "And Elena?" "Gets a generous settlement. A house in the south where she can live quietly, away from all this. She'll be taken care of." Garrett's tone suggested this was more mercy than she deserved. "Hell, she'll probably be relieved. You think she wants to stay here, reminded every day of her failure? You'd be doing her a favor." "Don't!" Rowan's voice came out raw. "Don't you dare speak about her like that." "We'll speak about her however we need to in order to make you see sense." Lord Ashton, who'd been silent until now, moved closer. "Son, I knew your father. Good man, strong man. He would have made this choice already. He would have put the estate first, because that's what leaders do. They make the hard choices. My father loved my mother. And if your mother had been barren, he would have set her aside, because he understood duty." Ashton's eyes were hard. "You have a responsibility to more than just one woman. You have a responsibility to this entire region, to everyone who depends on the Ashcroft name meaning something. Sign the papers." Rowan looked around the study, at the 7 men who'd invaded his space, his home, his life. At Harlow standing quietly in the corner, watching with those calculating eyes. At the annulment papers that would end his marriage with a few strokes of a pen. "No." Garrett's face went red. "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly, and I'm telling you no. My marriage is mine. Not yours, not the council's. Mine. And I'm not ending it because you're impatient." "Then you're a fool." Pemberton gathered up the papers. "We're trying to save you, save the estate. But if you won't save yourself," he looked at the others, "then perhaps we need to consider other options." The threat was barely veiled. Rowan stepped forward, and something in his expression made even Garrett take a step back. "If you're threatening me in my own house, you'd better be prepared to follow through. Because I promise you, gentlemen, I am done being polite about this." The silence stretched like a drawn blade. Finally, Garrett nodded slowly. "So be it. But when this all comes crashing down, and it will, don't say we didn't warn you." They filed out, Harlow last. At the door, the advisor paused. That was a mistake, Your Grace. Was it? They'll move against you now, not openly. That would be too crude. But they'll find ways. Pressure points, leverage. Harlow's voice was soft. And when they do, you'll wish you'd taken the easier path. Get out. Harlow bowed slightly and left, closing the door with a click that sounded like a lock turning. Rowan stood alone in the study, his heart hammering, adrenaline making his hands shake. He'd won. He'd held the line. He'd protected his marriage. So why did it feel like he'd just lost something crucial? Gods. He found Elena in the garden that evening, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. She was staring at her flowers, most of them dying now as winter approached, brown and brittle despite her care. They came to see me today, he said. The council. She didn't turn. I heard. They wanted me to sign annulment papers. Now she looked at him, and her expression was unreadable. And? I refused. Something flickered across her face. Relief? Anger? Resignation? He couldn't tell anymore. The distance between them had grown too vast. Why? The question caught him off guard. Because you're my wife, because I made vows. That's not an answer. She turned fully now, and there was something fierce in her eyes. Why, Rowan? Why are you holding on to this when it's destroying both of us? Why won't you just let go? Because I love you. The words fell between them like stones into water, creating ripples that spread and spread. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Love isn't enough. We proved that already. Love doesn't make me fertile. Love doesn't give you an heir. Love doesn't stop the council from circling like vultures or the staff from whispering or the whole damn estate from watching us fail. Her voice cracked. Love just makes it hurt more. Elena, I'm tired of love that feels like drowning. I'm tired of being the reason you're at war with everyone. I'm tired of watching you tear yourself apart trying to protect something that's already broken. She wiped at her eyes angrily. Maybe they're right. Maybe we should just end this. At least then we'd stop destroying each other. I don't want to end it. Then what do you want? Because this... She gestured between them, at the garden, at the manor looming behind them. This isn't living. This is just postponing the inevitable. Rowan felt something crack inside him. I want my wife back. I want the woman I married who laughed and painted and saw possibility in harsh places. I want to stop feeling like I'm failing at everything that matters. I want... His voice broke. I want us to remember why we chose each other before the world told us we'd chosen wrong. Elena stared at him, and for a moment he thought he saw something shift, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself, a glimpse of the woman she'd been. Then she shook her head. That woman is gone, Rowan. I killed her myself, one disappointed month at a time, and I don't know if there's enough left of either of us to build something new from the wreckage. She walked past him, back toward the house, leaving him standing among dying flowers as the sun set and the temperature dropped, and the first snow of winter began to fall. That night, everything changed. Rowan was in his study, staring at estate maps he wasn't seeing, when he heard raised voices from the entrance hall. He moved to the door, listening. Can't just barge in here at this hour? That was Thomas, the head butler, voice tight with stress. I'm not barging. I have business with the Duke. A woman's voice, young and nervous. Rowan opened the door and stepped into the hall. A girl stood there, maybe 19, dressed in servant's clothes but with her chin raised defiantly. He recognized her vaguely, one of the kitchen staff, though he didn't know her name. What's this about? She turned to him and her hands were shaking. Your Grace, I need to tell you something. About Mr. Harlow. Ice flooded Rowan's veins. What about him? I shouldn't. He'll destroy me if he finds out. But I can't. I can't stay quiet anymore. She looked at Thomas, at the other servants hovering nearby. Can we speak privately? Rowan nodded and led her into the study, closing the door. She stood in the middle of the room, wringing her hands, clearly terrified. What's your name? Mary, Your Grace. I've worked here for 3 years, in the kitchens and sometimes serving the council when they meet. She took a shaky breath. I heard things I wasn't supposed to hear, and at first I thought it was just talk, just powerful men being powerful men. But then Mr. Vale left so suddenly, and the Duchess looked so broken, and you started drinking more, and I realized—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I realized Mr. Harlow was doing it on purpose." Rowan's hands clenched. "Doing what on purpose?" "Breaking your marriage, destroying it from the inside." The words tumbled out now, like she was afraid if she stopped she'd lose her courage. "I heard him talking to Lord Garrett 3 months ago. He said the Duke wouldn't agree to an annulment while the marriage looked functional, that they needed to create crisis. Make you both so miserable that ending it seemed like mercy." The room tilted. "He's been working with the council the whole time, feeding them information, telling them when to push, when to pull back, creating situations that would drive wedges between you and the Duchess." Mary's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He's the one who sent Mr. Vale here, not the Crown. Mr. Vale really is a surveyor, but Mr. Harlow arranged for his carriage to have problems near the estate, for him to need a place to stay. He wanted the Duchess to have someone to talk to, someone who would make you jealous, someone who would make the marriage look even more broken." Rowan couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to be closing in. "And it worked. The council thinks the Duchess had an affair, even though she didn't. The staff thinks your marriage is already dead. Everyone believes the annulment is inevitable." Mary was shaking now. "But it's all lies, all manipulation. Mr. Harlow has been orchestrating everything from the beginning." "Why?" The word came out hoarse. "Why would he do this?" "Because if you annul the marriage and remarry Lord Pemberton's daughter, Mr. Harlow becomes the new Duke's closest advisor. Lord Pemberton already promised. I heard them. They're planning to push you out eventually, make you look incompetent. Install Pemberton's family in your place with Mr. Harlow controlling everything behind the scenes." She looked up at him with desperate eyes. "He's been destroying you so he can take everything you have." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Every sympathetic conversation, every helpful suggestion, every gentle push toward annulment. Harlow hadn't been serving the estate. He'd been serving himself, and Rowan had trusted him completely. "Can you prove any of this?" "I heard the conversations, but it's just my word against his, and he's powerful, connected. Nobody will believe a kitchen girl." Her voice dropped. "But there's a ledger. He keeps it in his room. Records of payments to Lord Garrett, to Lord Pemberton, to others. Proof of the conspiracy. If you could find it—" "Where?" "His desk, bottom drawer, false back. Please, Your Grace, I wouldn't come forward if I wasn't sure. But I've watched what he's done to you, to the Duchess, and it's not right. None of it is right." Rowan stared at her, his mind racing. If she was telling the truth, if Harlow really had been orchestrating everything, then the past 6 months had been a lie. His marriage hadn't failed naturally, it had been murdered. Slowly, carefully, by someone he'd trusted completely. If I look and find nothing, Harlow will know someone accused him. He'll figure out it was you. "I know." Mary's chin lifted. "But I can't live with staying quiet, even if it costs me everything." The courage in her voice decided him. "Stay here. Don't leave this room until I come back." He moved through the manor with purpose now, rage burning away the fog that had clouded him for months. Harlow's rooms were in the west wing, not as grand as the family quarters, but substantial enough for a trusted advisor. The door was unlocked. Rowan slipped inside, finding a space that was meticulously organized, almost sterile. Nothing personal, nothing warm, just a place for a man who was always performing, always calculating. The desk sat against the far wall. Rowan moved to it, trying the bottom drawer. Locked. He grabbed a letter opener from the desktop and forced the lock. Subtlety be damned. The drawer opened. Empty. He felt along the back, finding the seam Mary had described. Pressed, pulled. A false panel swung open. Inside was a leather-bound ledger. Rowan grabbed it, opening to the first page. Columns of dates, amounts, names, payments to Lord Garrett, payments to Lord Pemberton, payments to half a dozen other council members. Notes in Harlow's precise handwriting. Pressure increased on Duchess. Duke showing signs of stress. Another month should do it. His hands shook as he turned the pages. 6 months of manipulation laid out in black and white. Plans to introduce suitable marriage candidates. Strategies to isolate Elena. Instructions to servants about which rumors to spread, which conversations to report back. There, near the end, Vale arrived as planned. Duchess responding. Duke jealous. Marriage deteriorating on schedule. The final entry, dated 3 days ago. Council ready to move. Duke resistant but weakening. Recommend final push. Once annulment complete, Pemberton girl moves in. Ashcroft neutralized within the year. Estate secured. Rowan closed the ledger, his chest tight with rage and grief. Everything. Everything had been a lie. Harlow hadn't been protecting the estate. He'd been staging a coup, using Rowan's love for his wife as a weapon, turning it into a tool for his own ambition. How many conversations had been manipulated? How many doubts had been planted? How much of the distance between him and Elena was real, and how much had been carefully engineered? Looking for something, Your Grace? Rowan spun. Harlow stood in the doorway, his expression cold. How long have you been planning this? From the beginning, Harlow stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. From the moment it became clear your wife couldn't produce an heir, I saw an opportunity. The council saw an opportunity. So we took it. You destroyed my marriage. I freed you from a marriage that was already doomed. You should be thanking me. Harlow moved closer, and there was no pretense of sympathy now, just naked ambition. You were never going to make the hard choice on your own. Too sentimental, too weak. So I made it for you. You manipulated everything, the isolation, the pressure, Adrian Vale, a convenient catalyst. Though I'll admit, the connection between him and your wife was stronger than I anticipated. Made things easier. Harlow smiled. You should have seen your face when you watched them together. That jealousy, that rage. Perfect. Rowan's fist connected with Harlow's jaw before he'd consciously decided to throw the punch. The advisor staggered back, blood blooming from his lip. You bastard! Careful, Your Grace. Harlow straightened, wiping his mouth. Assault in front of witnesses would give the council exactly the ammunition they need to declare you unfit. One more piece of evidence that you've lost control. There are no witnesses. Aren't there? Harlow's smile widened. Do you really think that kitchen girl found her courage all on her own? I told her where to find you, what to say. I wanted you to find the ledger. Rowan went cold. Why? Because now you know the truth, and the truth will eat you alive. Harlow's eyes glittered. You'll realize every doubt you had, every moment of distance with your wife. I planted them all. You'll question every conversation, every decision. You'll tear yourself apart trying to figure out what was real and what was manipulation. And by the time you're done destroying yourself, the council will step in and finish what I started. I'll expose you. With what? A ledger full of perfectly legal payments to council members? Advice given to a duke who was clearly struggling? Even if you could prove conspiracy, which you can't, it would only prove you were so incompetent you couldn't see betrayal happening under your own roof. Harlow shook his head. You've already lost, Rowan. You just don't know it yet. Get out. Rowan's voice was deadly quiet. Get out of my house, now, and if I ever see you again, I'll kill you. I'll be gone by morning, but it won't matter. Harlow moved to the door, paused. Your marriage is already dead. I just helped bury it. The only question now is whether you'll keep clinging to the corpse or finally let it go. Then he was gone, leaving Rowan alone with the ledger and the crushing weight of everything he'd lost. He found Elena in her room, sitting by the window, staring out at nothing. We need to talk. She didn't turn. I'm tired, Rowan. Whatever it is, Harlow's been manipulating us for months, maybe longer. Now she looked at him. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the resignation. What are you talking about? He sat down, placed the ledger between them. Read it. She did. Slowly at first, then faster, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to horror as the scope of the conspiracy revealed itself. He did this. Her voice was hollow. He orchestrated all of it. Everything, the pressure, the isolation. Adrian Vale. He sent him here on purpose to create exactly what happened, to make us doubt each other, to destroy what we had. Rowan's hands clenched. I thought I was losing you. I thought our marriage was failing naturally, but it was all him, all manufactured. Elena stared at the ledger like it was a snake. How much of it was real? The distance between us? The things we said, The way we... She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. How do we even know what's real anymore? I don't know. The admission hurt. I don't know what he planted and what we created ourselves. I don't know if the problems were real or if he just gave them shape. But Elena... He reached for her hand, and after a moment she let him take it. I know I love you. That's real. It's always been real. Everything else, the doubt, the distance, the jealousy, maybe he amplified it. But this? He squeezed her fingers. This is the only thing I'm sure of. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face. I wanted to hate you. It would have been easier, but I couldn't, even when I thought you'd chosen your legacy over me, even when I was ready to let you go. I couldn't stop loving you, and it made everything hurt worse. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I'm sorry I let him get in my head. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder, sooner, for us. We both stopped fighting. She wiped at her eyes. We let him win because we were too exhausted to see what he was doing, too lost in our own pain to notice we were being played. So what do we do now? Elena looked at the ledger, then at him. Something shifted in her expression, the exhaustion giving way to something harder, stronger. We stop running. We stop letting other people dictate our lives. We stop apologizing for what we can't control. She stood, still holding his hand. And we burn it all down. What? The council, the expectations, the whole system that demands we destroy ourselves for a bloodline. Her eyes were fierce now, alive in a way they hadn't been in months. If they want war, Rowan, we give them war. But together. No more fighting alone. No more silence. We face this as partners, or we don't face it at all. Looking at her, really seeing her for the first time in too long, Rowan felt something shift. The despair that had been crushing him began to transform into something else. Something dangerous. They'll come at us with everything they have. Let them. I'm done being afraid. Elena squeezed his hand. Are you with me? It should have been a hard choice. His legacy versus his wife. 300 years of Ashcroft history versus the woman standing in front of him. The safe path versus the one that would change everything. But in that moment, it was the easiest decision he'd ever made. Always. They called a council meeting for the next morning. Word spread fast. The Duke and Duchess, together for the first time in months, demanding the full council's presence. No excuses, no delays. Harlow was gone, vanished sometime during the night, but the council members he'd bought came anyway. 7 men who walked into the Great Hall expecting another round of pressure, another chance to push a weakened Duke towards surrender. They found Rowan and Elena standing side by side at the head of the table instead. What's this about? Lord Garrett demanded, his voice still carrying the arrogance of a man who thought he held all the cards. Sit down. Rowan's voice was ice. Something in his tone made them comply. Elena placed the ledger on the table. We found something interesting last night. Proof of a conspiracy to destroy our marriage and seize control of the estate. Marcus Harlow's personal records of payments, manipulations, and plans to remove my husband from power. The silence was absolute. We know he bought you. Rowan looked at each man in turn. We know about the payments. We know about the coordination. We know you've been working together to force an annulment so you could install your own puppet duchess and control the estate through her. Lord Pemberton's face had gone white. You can't prove, can't I? Rowan opened the ledger to a marked page. Here's a payment to you, Pemberton. 5,000 marks. Dated 2 months ago. The notation says, for cooperation in marriage pressure strategy. Should I read more? This is fabrication. Harlow was clearly embezzling. Then why did you just try to deny receiving money before you even knew what the ledger says? Elena's voice was sharp. You're caught, all of you. The question now is what we do about it. Garrett stood, his chair scraping back. You can't touch us. We represent the largest landholders in the region. Without us, the estate collapses. Maybe. Rowan stood too, bracing his hands on the table. Or maybe the estate survives just fine without corrupt council members who put their own ambition above everything else. Should we find out? You're bluffing. Am I? Because I'm looking at men who conspired to overthrow their duke. That's treason. I could have every one of you arrested, your land seized, your families ruined. He let the words hang. Or we could come to an arrangement. The threat cut through their bluster. Pemberton sat down heavily. The others exchanged nervous glances. What arrangement? You resign from the council immediately. You forfeit any claim to influence on estate matters, and you never— Rowan's voice went deadly quiet. Never speak about my wife again. Not her fertility, not her worth, not her place in this house. She is the Duchess, and you will treat her with the respect that position demands. Do that, and the ledger stays private. Refuse. He smiled without warmth. And we see what the Crown thinks about lords who conspire against their duke. That's blackmail, Ashton said, his voice weak. That's justice. Elena's eyes were hard. You tried to destroy us. You used our pain as a weapon. You manipulated my husband and isolated me and conspired to steal everything the Ashcroft family built. So yes, this is blackmail. And you're going to accept it because the alternative is worse. The men looked at each other, at the ledger, at the Duke and Duchess standing united for the first time in months. Finally, Garrett nodded. We resign. All of you? One by one, they murmured agreement, defeated, exposed, powerless. Good. Rowan straightened. Get out, and if I hear you've spoken one word against this estate or my wife, I will end you. That's not a threat. That's a promise. They filed out, broken men who'd gambled on a coup and lost. Only when the door closed did Elena's knees buckle. Rowan caught her, holding her upright. We did it, she whispered. We did. So what now? He looked at her, his wife, his partner, the woman he'd almost lost to other people's ambitions and his own fear. And he realized the question wasn't what came next. It was what they chose to build together, now that they were finally free to choose. Now, he said quietly, we decide what kind of legacy we actually want to leave. And I promise you, Elena, it's not going to be what anyone expects. She looked up at him, and for the first time in months, she smiled. A real smile. Small, fragile, but genuine. Good, because I'm done living for other people's expectations. So am I. They stood there in the empty council hall, surrounded by 300 years of history and tradition, and made a choice that would change everything. But outside the manor, in the village, and the tenant farms and the network of families that depended on the Ashcroft name, word was already spreading. The Duke had defied the council. The Duchess had fought back. The marriage everyone thought was dead had come back to life. And in the whispers and speculation, a question began to form. If they'd thrown out the old council, rejected the old rules, what came next? The answer would shock everyone. But that revelation was still coming. For now, Rowan and Elena stood together, battered but unbowed, ready to face whatever storm came next. Because they'd learned something crucial through the fire. Separate, they'd been breaking. Together, they were unbreakable. And the people who'd tried to destroy them had just learned the hardest way possible that there's nothing more dangerous than two people with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And the people who tried to destroy them had just learned the hardest way possible that there's nothing more dangerous than two people with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The first 24 hours after the council's expulsion were chaos. Rowan spent the morning in his study fielding angry letters from displaced council members, threats thinly veiled as concern for the estate's stability. Elena dealt with the household staff, half of whom were terrified they'd be dismissed for their roles in spreading rumors, the other half quietly celebrating that the Duchess had finally shown her teeth. By noon, word had reached the village. By evening, it had spread to the tenant farms. By the next morning, the entire Northern Territory knew. The Duke had purged his council, exposed a conspiracy, and done it all standing beside a wife everyone had written off as defeated. The reaction was mixed. They're saying you've lost your mind, Thomas reported, standing in the study doorway with the day's correspondence. That you've destroyed the estate's leadership structure out of spite. Lord Garrett's already sent word to 3 neighboring territories claiming you're unstable. Let him. Rowan didn't look up from the estate maps he'd been studying. He's a traitor who got caught. His opinion means nothing. Your Grace, with respect, his opinion carries weight with the Merchants' Guild. and the Northern Trade Consortium, and half the landowners between here and the capital. Thomas set down the letters. Without a council, you're going to face resistance on every front. They'll say you can't govern alone. I'm not governing alone. Elena's voice came from the doorway. She stepped into the study, still wearing her morning dress, but with her hair pinned back severely, ready for work. We're governing together, as we should have been from the start. Thomas blinked. The Duchess traditionally sits in parlors and produces heirs and stays out of estate business. Elena's tone was sharp. But since I've failed at the producing heirs part, I might as well be useful in other ways, don't you think? A moment of silence. Then Thomas, to his credit, bowed slightly. What would you have me do, Your Grace? Start by bringing us the agricultural reports from the Eastern tenants, then the timber operation ledgers, then the trade agreements currently in negotiation. She moved to stand beside Rowan at the desk. If we're rebuilding this council, we need to know exactly what we're working with. No assumptions, no inherited wisdom, just facts. Thomas nodded and hurried out. Rowan looked at his wife. You're sure about this? About what? Taking an active role in running the estate I've lived on for 5 years? She picked up one of the maps. I should have done this from the beginning. Maybe if I'd been less focused on my supposed duty and more focused on being actually useful, we wouldn't have been so vulnerable to Harlow's manipulation. That's not your fault, isn't it? I let them make me small, let them convince me my only value was as a broodmare. Her jaw tightened. Well, I'm done with that. If the bloodline ends with us, at least we can make sure what we build matters more than just a name. The words hung in the air, radical and terrifying, and somehow exactly right. You realize what you're saying. Rowan set down the pen he'd been holding. You're talking about fundamentally changing how this estate operates, about abandoning the entire traditional structure. I'm talking about survival, ours and everyone who depends on us. Elena met his eyes. The old way was killing us, Rowan. Maybe it's time to try something new. Before he could respond, the door burst open. Mary, the kitchen girl who'd exposed Harlow, stood there, out of breath and pale. Your Graces, You need to come, now. They found a crowd gathered in the main courtyard. 50 people, maybe more. Tenant farmers and village workers and household staff, all talking at once. At the center stood a man Rowan recognized, Jacob, one of the Eastern tenant farmers, his face wind-burned and hard. What's this about? Rowan's voice cut through the noise. The crowd quieted. Jacob stepped forward, cap in his hands. We heard what you did, with the council, and we... He glanced at the others. We wanted to know what comes next. What do you mean? I mean the council's gone. The structure that's run this estate for 100 years, you tore it down in one morning. Jacob's voice wasn't accusatory, just uncertain. So what happens now? Do you install a new council? Do you start making decisions alone? Do we even still have jobs? Rowan felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes on him. These were the people the council had claimed to represent, the families whose livelihoods depended on the estate's stability. And they were scared. The council was corrupt, he said. They were working to undermine this estate for their own gain. I won't apologize for removing them. We're not asking for an apology. A woman spoke up from the back, Sarah, who ran the village bakery. We're asking for a plan. Because right now, all we know is that everything's changed and nobody's telling us how. Elena stepped forward before Rowan could respond. You're right. You deserve answers, so here's the truth. We don't have a complete plan yet. We're figuring it out as we go. But what we do know is this. The old system was built on silence and secrets, and a handful of powerful men making decisions behind closed doors. That system allowed people like Marcus Harlow to nearly destroy everything, so we're not rebuilding that system. Then what are you building? Jacob asked. Something different, something that includes you. Elena's voice strengthened. We want representatives from the tenant farms, from the village, from the trades, people who actually know what's happening on the ground, not nobles who haven't seen a plow in 20 years. We want input from the people who'll be affected by our decisions. And yes, she raised her voice as muttering started. It'll be messy, it'll be complicated, but it'll be honest, and it'll be ours. The crowd exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd expected. You're saying we'd have a voice? Sarah sounded skeptical. Actual influence? I'm saying we'd be fools not to listen to the people who actually run this place. Elena looked at Rowan, and he saw the challenge in her eyes. The question, "Are you with me on this?" He was, completely. "My wife is right," he said. "The Ashcroft name has held this territory for 3 centuries, but that doesn't mean we have all the answers, so yes, we're asking for your help, your knowledge, your participation." He paused. "Anyone interested?" Another exchange of glances. Then Jacob stepped forward. "I'll do it. If you're serious about this." "I'm serious." "Then count me in." Sarah moved to join him. Then others, a blacksmith, a timber foreman, 2 more farmers, a weaver, a merchant. Within minutes, a dozen people had volunteered. Good. Rowan felt something loosen in his chest. "We meet in 3 days. Bring your questions, your concerns, your ideas, and we'll start building something better." The crowd dispersed slowly, talking among themselves. Rowan caught fragments as they left. "Did you hear that?" The Duchess spoke up. "Maybe things really are changing." When they were alone again, Elena let out a shaky breath. "That was either brilliant or insane." "Probably both." Rowan turned to her. "But you were right. The old way was killing us. Time to try something new. Even if it fails? Even then, at least we'll fail trying to build something worth having instead of clinging to something that was already broken." She smiled, small, tired, but genuine. "Your ancestors are probably rolling in their graves." "Good. Let them roll. They're not the ones who have to live in the world we're building." The next 3 days were brutal. They worked from dawn until well past midnight, poring over every aspect of the estate's operations. Elena discovered she had a talent for numbers, spotting inefficiencies in the agricultural reports that had been draining resources for years. Rowan found himself actually listening to his stewards instead of just signing whatever they put in front of him. Together, they began to see the estate not as a legacy to preserve, but as a living system that had been suffocating under the weight of tradition. "Look at this." Elena spread out a series of reports on the study desk. "The eastern fields are producing half what they should. The council kept blaming poor soil, but the soil surveys are fine. The problem is the crop rotation. They've been planting the same thing in the same fields for 20 years because that's how we've always done it. Can we fix it?" "Easily. We just need to actually implement the rotation schedule the agricultural reports have been recommending for a decade." She looked up. "Why didn't the council act on this?" "Because change was risk, and risk might affect their profits." Rowan's jaw tightened. They were so focused on maintaining the status quo that they let everything stagnate. "Then we don't maintain the status quo. We fix what's broken, even if it's uncomfortable." It became their mantra over those 3 days. Fix what's broken, even if it's uncomfortable. They reorganized the timber operations to be more sustainable. They renegotiated trade contracts that had been bleeding money for years. They even addressed the staff's concerns about job security, guaranteeing positions based on performance rather than patronage. And through it all, they worked side by side. Not as Duke and Duchess playing roles, but as partners trying to build something that actually mattered. It wasn't always smooth. They argued about priorities, about methods, about how fast to push change. But the arguments were honest now. No more silence, no more retreating to separate corners. If they were going to rebuild, they'd do it together or not at all. The first council meeting was chaos. Rowan had expected order. What he got was 12 people crowded around a table designed for 7, all talking at once. "Can't possibly maintain the northern road if we're also funding. The irrigation project should take priority. We're losing crops too. Speaking of which, who approved the grain shipment last month? Because the pricing was..." "Enough!" Elena's voice cut through the noise. The room went silent. "One at a time. Jacob, you were saying about the northern road?" The tenant farmer cleared his throat. "Right. The thing is, Your Grace, that road's been deteriorating for 5 years. Every winter it gets worse. My wagons can barely make it through with full loads anymore. It's costing us time and money." "How much to repair it?" "Properly? Maybe 2,000 marks, but that's if we do it right, not just patch it." Rowan made a note. "What about the irrigation project, Sarah?" The baker leaned forward. The eastern fields have been flooding every spring because the drainage is shot. If we fixed it, we could reclaim maybe 50 acres that are currently useless. That's food for the village and surplus for trade. Cost? Around 1,500 marks, but the return would pay for itself in 2 years. Both projects cost more than we have in the discretionary fund, Thomas pointed out from his position by the door. Then we adjust the budget. Elena pulled out the ledgers they'd been reviewing. Cut the ceremonial fund. We don't need elaborate seasonal celebrations while roads are crumbling. Reduce the household staffing budget. We have twice as many servants as we actually need. And, she paused, looking at Rowan. We sell the Southern Hunting Lodge. Nobody's used it in 10 years. Gasps around the table. Your Grace, that lodge has been in the Ashcroft family for generations. I know. Rowan met Elena's eyes and saw the challenge there. The question of whether he meant what he'd said about building something new. But it's a luxury we can't afford while our people can't get crops to market. Sell it. Use the money for actual improvements. The room went silent again, this time with something that felt like respect. Right then, Jacob scribbled notes. Northern road repair and eastern irrigation. Anything else? They worked through the afternoon, addressing issues that had been ignored for years because they were too small for council attention. A bridge that needed reinforcing, a school that needed books, a granary that was practically falling down. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would be celebrated in family histories, but all of it mattered to the people who actually lived and worked here. By the time they finished, Rowan's head was spinning with numbers and priorities, and 100 small decisions that somehow felt more important than any grand policy he'd ever approved. That was, he searched for words as the new council members filed out. Exhausting, Elena supplied. I was going to say real. It felt real. Because it is real. These are actual problems with actual solutions, not political theater. She gathered up the papers they'd generated. And did you notice? Nobody questioned my presence. Nobody suggested I should leave the decisions to the men. They just accepted that I had a right to be here. You earned that right. They saw you working, saw you cared about the same things they did. The old council would have shut me down in the first 5 minutes. The old council was full of fools. Rowan stood, stretching muscles sore from hours at the table. The new one might actually be worth something. Word spread fast. Within a week, neighboring estates were sending inquiries. What was happening at Ashcroft Hall? Rumors spoke of a council that included common workers, of a duchess who negotiated trade contracts, of a duke who'd sold family property to fix roads. The reactions ranged from curious to scandalized. Lord Ashton from the neighboring Western Territory sent a letter full of concerns about dangerous precedents and abandoning proper order. Rowan burned it without responding, but others were more thoughtful. Lady Catherine from the Southern Estate sent a note asking for details about how they'd structured the new council. My husband is old-fashioned, she wrote, but I've been trying to tell him for years that our tenants have valuable insights he's ignoring. Your experiment interests me. Rowan showed the letter to Elena over dinner, a meal they'd started taking together again, actually talking instead of sitting in painful silence. Experiment, she read aloud. That's one way to put it. Do you think it's working? I think it's too early to tell. We've made changes, but implementation takes time. The real test is whether things actually improve. She set down the letter. But yes, I think we're heading in the right direction, even if it means ending the bloodline. The question had been hovering between them for days. They'd been so focused on rebuilding that they'd avoided discussing the elephant in the room, that all their changes didn't address the fundamental issue the old council had used against them. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been thinking about that, about legacy, about what we're supposed to leave behind. And maybe a bloodline isn't the only kind of legacy. Maybe building something that outlasts us, something that actually helps people, maybe that matters more than just passing on a name. She met his eyes. I know that's not what your father would have wanted, or your grandfather, but it's what I want. Rowan reached across the table, taking her hand. A legacy of improvement instead of just inheritance, of what we built instead of what we were born into. The Northern Territories will think we're insane. Let them. We're not living for them anymore. It was a radical idea that they could choose their own definition of success instead of accepting the one they'd inherited, that a marriage without children could still be valuable, that an estate could thrive without an heir as long as it had strong systems and invested people. Radical, terrifying, and somehow completely right. 6 weeks after the council purge, the first measurable results started coming in. The northern road was halfway repaired, and wagon traffic had increased by 30%. The eastern irrigation project was underway, with farmers already seeing improvement in soil drainage. The reorganized timber operations were actually turning a profit for the first time in years. Small victories, incremental progress, but visible. Rowan was reviewing the latest agricultural reports when Thomas appeared with a visitor. "Your Grace, Adrian Vale is here to see you." Rowan looked up sharply. The surveyor, the catalyst for so much pain, standing in his entrance hall? "Send him away." "Your Grace, he says it's important. Something about Harlow." That changed things. Adrian looked thinner than Rowan remembered, his face drawn. He didn't meet Rowan's eyes as he was led into the study. "I know I have no right to be here," he started, "but I had to." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I owe you both an apology." Elena had appeared in the doorway. "For what?" "For being a pawn in Harlow's game. I really am a surveyor. That part was true. But he did arrange for my carriage to have problems near your estate. He paid the innkeeper to direct me here. I didn't know why at the time, thought it was just good fortune." Adrian's hands clenched. "But after I left, he contacted me, told me what he'd used me for, how he'd manipulated the situation to create doubt between you, and His voice cracked. "I felt sick. I thought the connection with the Duchess was genuine friendship. I didn't realize I was a weapon." "It wasn't your fault," Elena said quietly. "You didn't know." "That doesn't make it better. I came here, talked to you, made your husband jealous, all while thinking I was just being kind, but I was making everything worse." He finally looked up. "I tried to find Harlow after I figured it out, to confront him. But he'd disappeared. Nobody knows where he went." "He's gone," Rowan said flatly. "That's all that matters." "Is it, though? Because I've been asking questions, carefully. And I think—" Adrian pulled out a folded paper. "I think he's done this before, in other estates. Found vulnerable situations and exploited them. I have the names of 3 other territories where similar things happened. Marriage breakdowns, council coups, sudden changes in power structure, always with an advisor who came out ahead." Rowan took the paper, scanning the names. 2 he recognized. Both estates had undergone dramatic leadership changes in recent years. "You think Harlow's building some kind of network?" "I think he's building an empire. One estate at a time, installing puppet leaders he can control." Adrian looked between them. "I don't know his endgame, but whatever it is, it's bigger than just Ashcroft Hall." The implications settled like ice in Rowan's stomach. If Harlow was doing this systematically, across multiple territories, then exposing him in one place wouldn't stop him. He'd just move on to the next vulnerable estate. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because you stopped him. You and the Duchess. You saw through him, fought back, survived. Nobody else has managed that." Adrian's voice strengthened. "If he's going to be stopped, really stopped, it has to start here. With you." Elena moved to stand beside Rowan, reading over his shoulder. "These estates, they're all in the northern territories, all frontier regions where traditional power structures are already strained." "Exactly. Places where change is possible if you know how to push, where marriages fail and councils fracture, and nobody questions too hard if a charismatic advisor suggests a different path." Adrian looked at them steadily. "You could warn them. Share what you learned. Build a coalition against him. Or we could just focus on our own estate and let others fend for themselves," Rowan said. "You could. But is that who you are? People who only care about their own territory?" The challenge hung in the air. Rowan looked at Elena, saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They'd spent 6 weeks rebuilding their estate, their marriage, their sense of purpose. They could stop there, keep their heads down, focus inward, or they could recognize that the battle they'd fought was bigger than just them. "We need to think about this," Elena said finally. Adrian nodded. "I understand. I'll be at the village inn for 3 days if you want to discuss further. After that, I'm heading south. I have mapping work to finish. But, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you two are building something important here. Something that could change how the Northern Territories operate. It would be a shame to let one man's ambition destroy that before it really starts. They argued about it for 2 days. It's not our responsibility to save every estate in the North, Rowan said, pacing his study. We barely saved our own. But we have information that could help others. If Harlow is really doing this systematically, then the other dukes and duchesses should be smart enough to spot the pattern. It's not our job to hold their hands. Isn't it? Elena stood her ground. If we know there's a predator operating and we say nothing, aren't we complicit when the next marriage gets destroyed? When the next estate falls to a coup? We can't fight everyone's battles. I'm not asking us to. I'm asking us to share what we learned, to warn people who might be vulnerable. She moved closer. Rowan, 6 weeks ago we were broken, isolated, convinced our marriage was our private failure. But it wasn't private. It was orchestrated. If someone had warned us, maybe we could have spotted Harlow's manipulation sooner. Or maybe not. Maybe we would have been too proud to listen, like most nobles are. Maybe, but at least we would have had the chance. She took his hands. I'm not saying we become crusaders. I'm saying we do the right thing with the knowledge we have, and then we let others make their own choices. He looked at her, this woman who'd found her voice in crisis, who'd transformed from duchess in name only to a partner he couldn't imagine governing without. And he realized she was right. They couldn't save everyone, but they could at least try to warn them. 3 estates, he said. The 3 Adrian identified. We send letters, share what we know, offer to discuss details if they're interested. Beyond that, he shrugged. It's up to them. Elena smiled. 3 estates. I can live with that. The response to their letters came faster than expected. 2 of the estates sent polite but dismissive replies. Thank you for your concern, but our situations are stable. No need to worry. The 3rd sent a rider who arrived at dawn 5 days later, demanding immediate audience with the Duke. Lady Catherine, the woman who'd written asking about their council structure, appeared in their study looking exhausted and determined. He's here, she said without preamble. The advisor you warned about, Marcus Harlow. He's been at my estate for 3 weeks, working with my husband's council, and everything you described, it's happening. The manipulation, the pressure, the slow destruction. Rowan and Elena exchanged glances. How bad is it? My marriage was already strained. My husband and I were cordial but not close. We have 1 son, so the heir question isn't pressing, but there are other vulnerabilities. Catherine's hand shook as she accepted the tea Elena offered. Harlow's been suggesting my husband needs fresh blood on the council, that I'm too involved in estate matters for a woman, that our son would be better served by a different kind of mother. It's subtle, but it's working. My husband is pulling away. The council is unified against me, and I realized, her voice broke. I realized I was watching the same pattern you described in your letter, the same slow poison. What do you want from us? Help. Advice. Anything. Catherine looked between them desperately. You stopped him. You survived. I need to know how. Elena sat beside her. We exposed him, found proof of his conspiracy, and used it to force the council to resign. But how did you find proof? How did you know where to look? They spent the next 2 hours explaining everything. Mary's warning, the ledger, the confrontation, the complete restructuring of their power base. Catherine listened with growing hope. So you're saying I need to find his records? Evidence of manipulation. And you need to shore up your own position first, Rowan added. We were vulnerable because we were isolated. You need allies, people who'll stand with you when the confrontation comes. I don't have allies. Harlow's made sure of that. Then make them. Elena's voice was firm. Find the people on your estate who've been overlooked, the servants who see everything, the tenants who know the land better than the council, the women who've been dismissed because they're just wives. Build your own power base before you move against him. Catherine stared at her. You're talking about revolution. I'm talking about survival. Elena met her eyes. The old system is broken, Lady Catherine. It made us vulnerable to predators like Harlow because it gave us no real power, no real voice. So yes, if you want to survive, you need to change the system. Not after you've defeated him, but as part of defeating him. The words hung in the room, radical and dangerous. Finally, Catherine nodded. Show me how. She stayed for 5 days. They taught her everything they'd learned about reorganizing an estate, building a representative council, identifying and cultivating genuine allies. Elena worked with her on spotting manipulation tactics. Rowan helped her strategize the confrontation with Harlow. By the time Lady Catherine left, she looked different, stronger, more certain. I don't know if this will work, she said as she prepared to depart, but at least I'm fighting back instead of just accepting defeat. That's all any of us can do, Elena said. Fight back and hope it's enough. They watched her ride away, and Rowan felt something shift. What they'd built at Ashcroft Hall wasn't just about them anymore. It was becoming a model, a template that others could follow, a revolution, just like Catherine had said. We're going to have more visitors, Elena said quietly. Once word spreads about what happened here, about how we changed things, people are going to come looking for answers. I know. That's going to make us targets. The traditional estates won't like what we're building. They'll see it as a threat to the entire system. Probably. Rowan took her hand. Are you scared? Terrified. She squeezed his fingers. But also alive in a way I haven't been in years. We're building something real, Rowan. Something that matters more than just bloodlines and inherited names. And yes, it's dangerous, but it's also worth fighting for, he finished. She smiled. Exactly. 3 months ago, they'd been broken, isolated, convinced their marriage was ending and their legacy dying. Now they stood together, having transformed not just their relationship, but their entire estate. Having proven that there were other kinds of power than inherited titles and traditional structures. The bloodline might end with them, but what they were building, the systems, the changes, the new way of governing, that would outlast any heir. And as word spread through the northern territories, as other estates began to watch and question and wonder if change was possible, Rowan and Elena realized they'd done something far more dangerous than just surviving Harlow's betrayal. They'd shown everyone that the old way wasn't the only way, that love and partnership could be stronger than legacy and tradition, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let the past die so the future could be born. The revolution they'd started was just beginning, and there was no going back now. Winter came hard that year, wind cutting across the northern territories like a blade, snow piling up against the manor walls until the whole estate seemed locked in ice. But inside Ashcroft Hall, something warmer was building. The new council met twice weekly now, sometimes more when urgent matters demanded attention. The Northern Road project was completed ahead of schedule. The eastern irrigation had transformed 50 acres of flood-prone land into productive fields. The reorganized timber operations were running so efficiently that neighboring estates were sending inquiries about their methods. Small victories, yes, but they were adding up to something larger. Rowan stood at his study window one morning, watching workers repair the old granary, another project the previous council had ignored for years. Elena appeared at his shoulder, holding 2 cups of tea. You're brooding again. I'm thinking. Same thing with you. She handed him a cup. What about? How fragile this all is. We've built something good here, but it only takes one crisis, one bad season, one mistake. He shook his head. And it could all collapse. Everything's fragile, Rowan. That's not unique to what we built. The old system was fragile too. That's how Harlow nearly destroyed it. She sipped her tea. The difference is, ours is fragile because it's new. Theirs was fragile because it was rotten. He smiled despite himself. When did you get so wise? When I stopped apologizing for existing and started actually paying attention. She moved closer. We've had 3 more letters this week. 2 estates asking about our council structure. One asking if we'd be willing to host a regional meeting to discuss alternative governance models. Alternative governance models. Is that what we're calling revolution now? It's what they're calling staying alive. Elena's voice turned serious. The Northern Territories are changing, Rowan. The old structures are cracking. We're not the only ones feeling the pressure. We're just the first ones to do something about it. Before he could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Your Grace, your Graces, you need to see this. He held out a letter bearing an official seal, the regional governor's mark. Rowan's stomach dropped as he read it. Then read it again, hoping the words would change. They didn't. They're calling an inquiry, he said finally. The regional council. They want to investigate our irregular governance practices and assess the stability of Ashcroft Estate. Elena took the letter, scanning quickly. They're questioning our authority, claiming we've abandoned proper structure and created a dangerous precedent. Who brought the complaint? Thomas cleared his throat. According to the Courier, it was Lords Garrett and Pemberton, along with 5 other landowners from neighboring territories. They're arguing you're unfit to govern and the estate should be placed under regional supervision until proper leadership can be established. The words hit like a punch. This wasn't just pushback, it was a direct attack, an attempt to strip them of everything they'd built. When's the inquiry? 3 weeks, at the regional capital. You're required to appear and defend your governance. Thomas hesitated. Your Grace, if they rule against you, they can seize the estate, install their own administration. You'd lose everything. Silence filled the study. Finally, Elena spoke. Then we don't lose. We go to this inquiry, and we prove them wrong. How? They're not going to be impressed by fixed roads and reformed councils. They want traditional structure, inherited authority, everything we've moved away from. So we don't play their game. We show them ours. Her eyes were fierce. We bring evidence of what we've built, numbers, results, testimony from people whose lives improved. We make them see that our way works. And if they don't care, if they've already decided, then we fight anyway, because giving up means letting them win, letting them prove that change is impossible, and people like us should just accept the roles we're born into. She grabbed his hand. I'm not going back to that, Rowan. I'm not becoming that ghost again. So we fight. Even if we lose, we fight. Looking at her, this woman who'd found steel in the fire that tried to break her, Rowan felt his own resolve harden. Then we fight. Well, the next 3 weeks were controlled chaos. They compiled reports on every improvement made since the council purge. Agricultural yields, trade revenues, infrastructure repairs. They gathered letters of support from tenant farmers, village merchants, even neighboring estates who'd implemented similar reforms. Jacob and Sarah agreed to testify at the inquiry. So did Mary, despite the obvious terror in her eyes when she agreed. Adrian sent word that he'd come as well, offering testimony about Harlow's manipulation. It's not going to be enough, Rowan said one night, reviewing their materials by lamplight. Hard numbers and testimonials won't matter to men who've decided we're dangerous before we even speak. Maybe not. Elena was working on her own testimony, crossing out lines and rewriting. But they'll matter to everyone else watching. This inquiry isn't just about us anymore. It's about whether the old guard can crush reform before it spreads. Every estate that's questioning the traditional system will be watching to see what happens. No pressure, then. She laughed, exhausted. None at all. 2 days before they were set to leave for the capital, an unexpected visitor arrived. Lady Catherine appeared at their door, travel-worn but triumphant. Behind her were 3 other women, duchesses and ladies from estates across the Northern Territories. We're coming with you, Catherine announced, to the inquiry, as witnesses. Rowan blinked. You don't have to. Yes, we do, because what happens to you happens to all of us. She gestured to her companions. Lady Margaret from the Western Estate. She's implementing a tenant council based on your model. Duchess Anne from the Southern Territory. She exposed an advisor trying to undermine her marriage. And Lady Rebecca from the Mountain Estate. She's been fighting for years to have actual influence in her own household. The other women nodded. Your inquiry isn't just about Ashcroft Hall, Catherine continued. It's about whether women can have power, whether common people can have voices, whether estates can evolve instead of just repeating the same patterns forever. So yes, we're coming, and we're testifying on your behalf. Elena looked at these women, strangers weeks ago, now allies, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Thank you," she managed. "You have no idea what this means." "We do, actually," Lady Margaret smiled. "We're all fighting the same battle, just in different territories." The regional capital loomed on the horizon 3 days later, its gray stone walls stark against winter sky. The inquiry was being held in the Grand Council Hall, a massive building designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Rowan and Elena walked in together, flanked by their supporters. The gallery was packed. Nobles from across the region, merchants, even common people who'd somehow gotten word and come to watch. At the front sat 7 regional governors, their faces stern and unyielding. In the petitioners section, Garrett and Pemberton waited with 5 other landowners, all looking smugly confident. "Lord Rowan Ashcroft, Duchess Elena Ashcroft," the head governor's voice echoed through the hall. "You've been called before this inquiry to answer charges of irregular governance, abandonment of traditional authority structures, and creating dangerous precedents that threaten regional stability. How do you answer these charges?" Rowan stood. "We answer that we've done nothing but improve our estate and serve our people. If that's irregular, then perhaps your definition of regular governance needs examining." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "Careful, young Duke." The governor's eyes were cold. "You're already on precarious ground. I'd suggest more respect for this council. I respect positions that are earned, not ones that are just inherited and never questioned." The murmurs grew louder. Garrett stood, red-faced. "This is exactly what we warned about. The boy has no respect for proper order. He's dismantled his council, given common peasants authority over estate matters, and allowed his wife," he spat the word, "to act as though she has equal governance rights. It's chaos dressed up as reform." "Is it?" Elena stood now, and the hall went quiet. "Because from where I'm standing, chaos is what you call change that threatens your power. Let me ask you, Lord Garrett, when's the last time you actually walked your estate, talked to your tenants, listened to what your people need? You don't answer to anyone, do you? That's the problem." She turned to the governors. "We've been accused of irregular governance, so let me show you what that looks like." She nodded to Jacob, who stood with a stack of documents. "Agricultural yields at Ashcroft Estate have increased 32% since we restructured our council. Trade revenues are up 40%. Infrastructure projects that were ignored for a decade are complete and functioning. And most importantly," she locked eyes with the head governor, "the people who actually live and work on our estate support what we've built. We didn't force change on them. We asked for their help in creating it." Sarah stood next. "I'm a baker in Ashcroft Village. Before the Duke and Duchess restructured things, I had no voice. No way to address problems that directly affected my business and my family. Now I sit on the estate council. I contribute to decisions, and because of that, my village is thriving in ways it never did under the old system." Testimony after testimony followed, farmers talking about improved yields, merchants discussing better trade conditions, Mary describing how the old council's corruption had gone unchallenged until the Duke and Duchess exposed it. Then Lady Catherine stood. "I'm not from Ashcroft Estate, but I'm here because what's happening there is what needs to happen everywhere. The traditional system, the one you're defending, that system nearly destroyed my marriage through an advisor's manipulation. It nearly cost me my estate. The only reason I'm still standing is because the Duke and Duchess showed me there was another way." She looked at the governors. "You call their reforms dangerous. I call them survival." The other ladies stood with her. One by one, they testified about implementing similar changes, about fighting against corrupt advisors and stagnant councils, about discovering their own voices in systems designed to silence them. The gallery was buzzing now. This wasn't just about one estate anymore. Finally, Adrian stood. "I'm a crown surveyor. I have no stake in this inquiry except truth. And the truth is Marcus Harlow, the advisor who nearly destroyed Ashcroft Estate, has done this before. Multiple times across multiple territories. He's been allowed to operate freely because the traditional system has no accountability. It values appearance over reality, tradition over truth." He looked at the governors steadily. "The Duke and Duchess didn't abandon proper governance. They created something better, and that terrifies people who've built their power on a system that's fundamentally broken." Garrett was on his feet. "This is absurd. We're not here to debate philosophy. We're here because we exposed you." Rowan's voice cut through the noise. "Because we proved the old council was corrupt, and now you're trying to punish us for it. This inquiry isn't about irregular governance. It's about revenge. You want to destroy what we built because it threatens your power. That's slander? Then prove me wrong. Show evidence that our estate is failing. Show testimony from our people saying they want the old system back. Show anything except your own outrage that someone dared to do things differently." Silence. Garrett looked at Pemberton. The other landowners shifted uncomfortably. They had no evidence because there was none. The estate was thriving. The people supported the changes. All they had was tradition and fear. The head governor leaned forward. "Lord Ashcroft, even if we accept that your reforms have shown positive results, which is still debatable, you've set a dangerous precedent. If every estate decides to abandon traditional structures, chaos will follow. There must be order, continuity, respect for established authority." "Why?" Elena's voice was sharp. "Because that's how it's always been done? Because change is scary? Because men like Lord Garrett can't imagine a world where their inherited privilege doesn't guarantee power? Because without structure, society collapses. We have structure, just not your structure. We have accountability, representation, systems that actually serve the people they govern instead of just maintaining power for its own sake." She moved to stand beside Rowan. "You want continuity? Fine. Continue the corruption. Continue ignoring the people who do the actual work. Continue letting predators like Marcus Harlow operate freely because calling them out would be irregular. Or..." She looked around the hall, at the packed gallery, at the faces watching with something like hope. "Or admit that the old way is dying. That estates across the north are questioning it. That change is coming whether you approve or not. And you can either help guide that change, or you can be swept away by it." The hall erupted, nobles shouting support, others shouting opposition, the governors calling for order while the gallery ignored them. It was chaos, beautiful, messy, human chaos. Finally, the head governor stood, his gavel hammering for silence. "This inquiry is adjourned. We'll deliberate and issue a ruling in 3 days." Those 3 days felt like 3 years. They stayed in the capital, locked in an inn room, waiting. Rumors flew. The governors were split. Some wanted to make an example of Ashcroft Estate. Others recognized that crushing reform would cause more problems than it solved. "It could go either way," Lady Catherine said over dinner on the second night. She'd stayed with the other ladies, forming a kind of ad hoc alliance. "The traditional governors hate what you've done, but the younger ones, they're watching what's happening in their own territories. They know their people are restless." "So we wait," Rowan said. "We wait." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She stood at the inn window watching the capital's lights scatter across the darkness. Rowan joined her. "Whatever happens tomorrow, don't." She turned to him. "Don't give me the 'we tried our best' speech. I need to believe we're going to win. And if we don't, then we rebuild somewhere else. We start over. We keep fighting." Her jaw set. "But we don't go back. We don't become the people we were 6 months ago, broken and silent and letting others define us. Promise me that." He pulled her close. "I promise. Just come." The ruling came at noon the next day. The Grand Council Hall was even more packed than before. Rowan and Elena stood at the front, hands clasped, waiting as the 7 governors filed in. The head governor remained standing, a document in his hands. "We have reviewed the testimony, examined the evidence, debated the precedents and implications." He paused, and Rowan's heart hammered. "This inquiry was brought on charges that Ashcroft Estate has abandoned proper governance through irregular practices. However, we find," the pause stretched endlessly, "that governance is measured not by adherence to tradition, but by results. And the results at Ashcroft Estate speak for themselves." He looked down at Rowan and Elena. "This council recognizes that the reforms implemented at Ashcroft Estate, while unconventional, have proven effective. We therefore dismiss all charges and recognize the Duke and Duchess Ashcroft's authority to govern their estate as they see fit." The hall exploded with noise, cheers from some sections, outrage from others. But the governor wasn't finished. Furthermore, he raised his voice. We recognize that the northern territories are changing. Traditional structures that served adequately for generations are proving insufficient for current challenges. Therefore, this council will establish a working group to study alternative governance models, with Duke and Duchess Ashcroft serving as consultants. Rowan felt Elena's hand tighten in his. They'd won, not just survived, actually won. This inquiry is concluded. The gavel came down, and in that moment, everything changed. The aftermath was chaos of a different kind. Estates across the north began implementing reforms, not all following Ashcroft's model exactly, but all moving away from the rigid traditional structures. The revolution Elena had named months ago was spreading. Garrett and Pemberton retreated to their estates, their influence shattered. 3 other members of their conspiracy were investigated and removed from their positions. The old guard wasn't gone, but it was wounded. And in that wound, something new was growing. 6 months after the inquiry, Rowan stood in the great hall of Ashcroft Estate, looking at the gathered crowd. The new council had expanded, now 15 members, representing every part of the estate's operations. Beyond them, seats for visiting observers from other estates. What had started as survival had become a movement. Before we begin, he said, I want to acknowledge what we've built here. Not just infrastructure or policies, but a community. A way of governing that values people over tradition, results over appearance, honesty over performance. He looked at Elena, standing beside him, as she always did now. We didn't plan this. We were just trying to survive. But sometimes survival requires building something completely new. Applause rippled through the hall. The meeting proceeded. Discussions of new projects, debates over resource allocation, reports from working groups. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would be celebrated in family histories. But all of it mattered. Afterward, as people filed out, Lady Catherine approached. The Western Territory is sending a delegation next month. They want to observe your council process. She smiled. 4 more estates after that. You've become the model everyone's studying. That wasn't the plan, Elena said. Best revolutions never are. Catherine squeezed her hand. You gave us permission to imagine something different. That's worth more than any heir. The words settled warmly in Elena's chest. That evening, Rowan and Elena walked through the estate gardens. Spring had come late that year, but the flowers Elena had planted were finally blooming. Roses that shouldn't survive but did, pushing through harsh soil to find sunlight. Do you miss it? He asked. The old way, when things were simpler. Simpler? She laughed. You mean when I was drowning in shame and you were drinking yourself numb? When we couldn't talk to each other without feeling like failures? She shook her head. That wasn't simpler, it was just quieter. Fair point. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Elena spoke again. I don't regret that we won't have children. I used to. It felt like the ultimate failure, but now? She looked around at the estate, transformed by their work. This is our legacy. Not a bloodline, but what we built. The systems we created. The lives we improved. The model we gave to others. She met his eyes. That's going to outlast any heir. The Ashcroft name ends with us. Maybe, but what the Ashcroft name means, that's just beginning. She smiled. 300 years of inheritance, and we're the ones who decided what mattered more was what we did with it. Rowan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Your ancestors would be scandalized. Good. Let them spin in their graves. I'm not living for dead people's expectations anymore. They stood there as the sun set, painting the northern mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The manor rose behind them, no longer a prison of tradition, but a symbol of transformation. The estate spread before them, alive with the work of people who finally had voices. It wasn't perfect. The traditional nobles still fought them. Resources were always tight. Every decision was a negotiation, every reform a battle. But it was real. It was theirs. And it was worth every struggle. 1 year after the inquiry, they hosted a regional gathering. 12 estates sent representatives, some to learn, some to share their own reforms, some just to meet the Duke and Duchess who'd sparked a revolution without meaning to. The gathering lasted 3 days. Workshops on council structures, discussions of agricultural innovation, women's sessions on claiming authority in systems designed to exclude them. It was unprecedented, nobles and commoners working side by side, sharing knowledge, building connections. On the final night, they held a feast. Not the formal, suffocating affairs of traditional nobility, but something warmer. Tables mixing estate lords with tenant farmers, duchesses with village merchants. Real conversations, real connections. Rowan stood to give a toast. A year ago, my wife and I were broken. Our marriage was dying, our estate was under siege, and we couldn't see any path forward except surrender. He found Elena in the crowd, her eyes bright. We survived because we stopped fighting alone, because we asked for help, because we dared to imagine something different than what we inherited. He raised his glass. To everyone here, thank you for having the courage to question tradition, to prioritize people over prestige, to build something better even when it's terrifying. His voice strengthened. The Northern Territories are changing, not because of any one estate or any one couple, but because all of us decided that the old way wasn't good enough anymore. So here's to the future we're building together. May it be worth the fight. To the future! The response echoed through the hall. As people drank and celebrated, Elena slipped outside. Rowan found her in the garden, looking up at the stars. You okay? More than okay. She leaned into him. I was just thinking about where we were a year ago, how hopeless it all felt, how certain I was that everything was ending. It was ending. We just didn't realize we got to choose what came next. Do you think it'll last? What we've built? I don't know. Maybe some estates will slide back to the old ways. Maybe we'll face new challenges we can't predict. He kissed her hair. But right now, in this moment, we've proven that change is possible. That power doesn't have to be inherited to be legitimate. That love and partnership can be stronger than legacy and tradition. Not bad for a Baron Duchess and a Duke who destroyed his council. He laughed. Not bad at all. They stood there, two people who'd been tested by fire and emerged transformed. Not perfect. They still argued, still made mistakes, still struggled with the weight of what they'd built. But together, in partnership, creating something that would outlast them both. The bloodline would end with them. The 300-year Ashcroft dynasty would die. But what they'd created, the systems, the model, the proof that different was possible, that was just beginning. In estates across the north, women were finding their voices. Common people were claiming authority. Traditional structures were cracking, making room for something new. It would be messy, it would be contested, it would take generations to fully take root. But it had started here, in this harsh northern territory, with two people who'd refused to accept that their only choices were surrender or destruction. They'd found a third way. And in doing so, they'd changed everything. 5 years later, the transformation was undeniable. The Northern Territories had become known as the Reform Region, estates experimenting with representative councils, women taking active governance roles, common people having actual influence. Not all the changes stuck. Some estates reverted to tradition. Some tried reforms and failed. But enough succeeded that the movement couldn't be ignored anymore. Ashcroft Estate had become something more than just a territory. It was a training ground. Young nobles came to observe the council meetings. Commoners came to learn about organizing. Women came to see proof that they could be more than ornamental. Elena had written a manual on estate governance, practical, direct, focused on what actually worked rather than what looked impressive. It was being copied and distributed across the region, sometimes officially, often in secret by people hungry for alternatives. Rowan had established a network of reformed estates, sharing resources and innovations. What one territory figured out, others could learn from. It wasn't perfect collaboration. Jealousies and competition still existed, but it was better than the isolated, suspicious system they'd inherited. The old guard still fought them, always would. But they were fighting a defensive battle now, trying to hold ground instead of taking it. On their 5th wedding anniversary since the inquiry, Rowan surprised Elena by taking her to the meadow where he'd proposed 10 years earlier. It looked different now. The estate had built a school there, children's laughter echoing across the field. "I thought you'd hate that I changed your meadow," she said, watching the children play. "It's better this way. We're not the only thing that matters here anymore. He took her hand. I was thinking about what you said, about legacy. Which time? I say a lot of things. He smiled. About how what we build matters more than what we inherit. I think... He paused. I think we should make it official. Change the estate charter. Instead of passing to a single heir, it passes to the council. The governance structure we built, that becomes the inheritance. Not a person, a system. Elena stared at him. That's radical even by our standards. I know, but think about it. The Ashcroft estate would survive as an institution, not a bloodline. The council would elect new leadership from within their ranks. Knowledge and systems would transfer instead of power and privilege. His eyes were bright. We could model what we've been preaching, that governance should be earned, not inherited. Your father would rise from his grave. Good. Let him. Rowan squeezed her hand. What do you think? She looked at the school, at the children learning in a building that wouldn't exist under the old system, at the estate spread beyond, thriving because they dared to reimagine what was possible. I think it's perfect, she said. Let's do it, son. The charter change took 8 months to finalize, legal challenges, regional approval, endless negotiations. But when it was done, Ashcroft Estate became the first territory in the North to transfer governance to an elected body rather than inherited bloodline. The reaction was predictable: scandal from traditionalists, celebration from reformers, intense curiosity from everyone else. But it worked. When Rowan and Elena eventually stepped back from daily governance, not retiring completely, but moving into advisory roles, the council continued seamlessly. The estate didn't collapse. Leadership didn't fracture. It just kept building on what they'd started. 20 years after that night in the study, when everything had seemed hopeless, Rowan and Elena stood in the Great Hall for a ceremony. The Regional Council was formally recognizing Ashcroft Estate's contribution to Northern governance reform. But more than that, they were announcing that 5 other estates had adopted similar charter structures. The movement was spreading beyond what anyone could have imagined. Duke and Duchess Ashcroft, the regional governor said, a different man than the one who'd presided over their inquiry, younger and more open to change. You've transformed not just your own estate, but provided a model for the future. The Northern Territories are stronger, more stable, and more just because of what you built. Applause filled the hall. Afterward, as they accepted congratulations, a young woman approached. She looked nervous but determined. Your Grace, I'm from the Eastern Estate. I've read your manual 3 times. I just wanted to say, she swallowed hard, I'm my estate's first female council member, elected last month, and it's because you proved it was possible, that women could be more than decorative, that we could actually govern. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You did that yourself. We just opened a door. You walked through it. Still, thank you for opening the door. After she left, Rowan slipped his arm around Elena's waist. Worth it? He asked quietly. Every moment, every fight, every terrifying leap into the unknown. She leaned into him. We didn't save the bloodline, but we saved each other. And in doing that, we saved so much more. No heirs, no dynasty, just a revolution, she finished, smiling. Started by 2 people who were too stubborn to give up and too foolish to realize what they were starting. I think I can live with that legacy. Me too. They stood together in the hall that had once felt like a prison, now feeling like home. Around them, people celebrated, not bloodlines or inheritance, but what could be built through courage and partnership and the stubborn belief that different was possible. The Ashcroft name would end, but what it came to mean, transformation, reform, the courage to choose partnership over tradition, that would echo through the Northern Territories for generations. In estates across the region, women were leading councils. Common people were shaping policy. Governance was being earned instead of inherited. Not everywhere. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to prove that the old way wasn't the only way. Enough to show that love and partnership could be stronger than legacy and bloodline. Enough to demonstrate that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let the past die so the future could be born. Duke Rowan Ashcroft and Duchess Elena Ashcroft had faced a choice no one should have to make: their name or their marriage, tradition or transformation, the past or the future. They'd chosen the future, and in doing so, they'd given it to everyone else too. The line ended with them. But the legacy, the real legacy, the one that mattered, was just beginning. And in the harsh, unforgiving northern territories where they'd nearly been destroyed, something new was growing, something stronger than bloodlines, something that would outlast any dynasty. Hope, change, proof that two people refusing to give up could change the world. Not perfectly, not easily, but completely. And that was worth more than 300 years of inherited names could ever be.